I think we should just start like we normally do, man. I still don't know if I've got my cursor working.
I've got like a 30-second lag on this video, right? Because I'm watching the YouTube stream as you guys are doing it. And just as we're about to go live, I'm waiting for Mikey to give the countdown. He goes, 5, 4, 3.
2, let's go. Professionals.
Completely negating the point of a minute.
Well, you probably saw if you were there right at the very beginning. It was like, oh, it's restarted. Why is it restarted? Yeah, I'm like, I'm not sure this interstream works sometimes.
Hello, everybody. Yeah, so Mikey was a little bit flustered just before the stream, so that's why there's this energy going on. But hi, welcome, Roderick. We have Gerard. We got some other people in the chats. We have Mikey. Hi, Mikey.
Hi.
How you doing today?
So I got delivered this morning a box of coffee. Oh. That was a really well-worded sentence structure. Me is good at English. So I got the, but it's wonky coffee. It's kind of this movement where the little coffee pods that you put in a coffee machine, instead of them being like fresh and brand new, they might be crumpled and stuff. So far, the coffee's been good, and I've been trying every single one of them. So I'm a little bit wired. No. But it's cheaper. I can get my high cheaper now.
That's very good.
Oh dear. So yeah, other things that I've been super busy with. It's at the end of the summer holiday, so apologies for last week. It just all fell apart.
All exploded.
Yeah. So yeah, it's been summer holidays. It's been quite frantic. Had some great time with and without the kids. Those with kids will know exactly what I mean by that. But yeah, absolutely fantastic. And I'll go through some
your
other...
kids are lovely, and I've also had great times with and without them.
Mainly without, but... Yeah, and what does William know you as, like the banana boy or something?
Banana man.
Banana man. There is a story behind that. Involves a cat bed.
Yes, and that's all the information you're getting. Frankly, you can figure out the rest yourself. There's also, for those of my generation who grew up in Britain, a really bad cartoon about a superhero.
Banana man.
Roderick says, can I order a pocket Mikey? I mean, you can order him. He won't do what you say.
I don't know what a pocket Mikey would look like. Please provide a description in the box below.
So, talking about people wanting things but not making the criteria clear, Mikey and I were talking, how's that for a segue? That was pretty professional.
I don't know what you're talking about yet.
Mikey and I were talking about the problem with you designing an asset for a game or a system in code, and you start adding features later. And Mikey gave the example of the wall. Mikey, tell me the example of your wall. This is such a good segue. It's really good.
Am I looking the right way? Yeah. So later on, we'll be going through some revelations, not really revelations, but good insights into designing procedural systems. I want to touch upon that because I've had a bit of a back and forth where when you're designing a procedural system, there's a couple of ways in which you can approach it. And the first one is not at all, because if just a standard brick wall with two bricks that have a staggered formation in them, so your standard brick wall, and you could just put that together using procedural systems, yes, but you could also just put it together using cubes, stretched cubes. Boom, 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 you're done. And you could probably do that quicker than starting to do a procedural system, other than like a really straightforward wall. You start to get like this overtaking ability with something like geometry nodes with procedural generation, when someone comes along and goes, well, could we have the wall a little bit longer? And it's not just geometry nodes. You could use an array modifier. That's also procedural. It came before geometry nodes. And for simple things, I'll often use something like that rather than jumping into
and
geometry
we should probably
nodes.
Clarify what we mean by procedural here for those who aren't entirely clear. When we're talking about procedural generation, whether it's in code or it's in 3D assets or 2D assets, we're talking about you write a set of rules, algorithms, that know how to generate the kinds of thing you want. It could be a maze, it could be a list of pub names, it could be the layout of bricks on a wall.
Yeah, totally. Anything that requires a procedure, a mathematical
To generate
construct, or an
things.
algorithm to construct it. So, and whether you're using geometry nodes, you could, because before geometry nodes came out, I made a building generator, and it used drivers in conjunction with the modifier stack. And by using drivers in conjunction with the modifier stack, if you change like the height of the building, it would automatically move the top of the building up 1 unit. Of course, when you do things like that, and with geometry nodes as well, you have to be very prescribed. You have to know what your unit size is. You need to know how they are all going to link together, where things are going to go ahead of time. And that can put a lot of front end loading on a project, because you can end up doing a lot before you actually see an end product.
Kind of the point, right? It's the design decisions you're making before you start building anything. What information do I need? What are my parameters? What are my limits? What am I not allowed to change?
Some rule sets I should write down and abide by in future. Anyway, that will be a segue we might get to later on. But when it comes to these procedural systems, you also, and I've discovered this myself in the last couple of weeks or so, when I've been designing different systems for some asset creation, I've come across a point where you start thinking about whether or not you generalize the thing that you're making. And by that, I mean, you've got a procedural system that works, and then you get, someone might come along, or you might say, well, can I have these, in the case of a wall, can I have these bricks larger? The problem is, if you've not catered for that in your procedural system, it might not be such an easy fix to actually put everything right. And so there's this, not only is there this boundary between, well, I could just make it really quickly and not worry about that because I just need like this one asset. I don't need 500 of them, or you think you don't need 500 of them. But then you can also have, hi, Cat. You can also have this point where you're making a procedural system, but do you generalize it? Do you abstract it further out and go, right, well, I need this control here that sets the size of the bricks, and by setting the size of the bricks, you've got some maths involved for the offset of the bricks, and that can go on and on and on, and you can very quickly end up with something that should take let's say a half a day to do, to suddenly taking 3 days to do. So there's a pros and cons for all of this, but each time you take that or dive down that rabbit hole a bit deeper, you can end up spending a long time playing around with settings.
Yep.
Is it a cat or is it a parrot in disguise?
There's no need to decide, but I'm trying very hard not to make loud shouting noises every time these excited claws go into my arm.
I can mute you if you
Bye. Well, I was going to say, we've done a little bit of talking. Do you want to show the kind of thing you're talking about, Michael?
I do, but I wasn't ready for that bit yet.
Okay, just in general, like it's a statement of intent rather than anything else.
Yes, we will be getting to that.
Yes, that is the thing I want to do. That is a goal.
I'm sure there's a mode on OBS, and let me know if you know what this mode is, where you can preview what you're doing, so you can switch to it and make sure it's working properly before you press switch. I think that's what studio mode does, but I'm not going to play around on stream, so
yeah, I mean, you want to be very careful with switches on stream.
I mean, you would see the OBS or Blender. I mean, that's it. Excuse me. Yes, so a couple of other things I wanted to talk about before diving into the blenders and a couple of procedural systems. The first one is a bit of a delay on assets. I'm hoping to this week actually get the assets out in a form where you guys can start playing with them. They won't be ready in Godot format yet, but they will be as GLTFs ready, and all those that have pre-purchased and everything, those will start to come available for you. I made the fundamental mistake of making a load of assets and not assigning materials as I went, which means you have to go back and reassign things. Jan's already discovered some of my
I mean, this is
intricacies.
One of the things that's easy to miss, right? Like,
yeah.
Because we're a small company, we don't have like a team of 20 coming up with design parameters. And we don't have years and years and years of these to go back and say, every time we make one of these, this is the procedure we follow. So it's really easy to think, oh, great, this looks fantastic. Where's the material channel?
oops, and how many materials and all the rest. One of the things that I did discover whilst going through this process was also I didn't set myself, and slap across my wrist for not actually listening to myself. I didn't actually set a parameter for how many of each particular item that we have. So whilst we now have 10 different sconces, we don't have 10 different of everything else. So I made a fundamental error of getting too excited in certain areas. You know, it's quite natural to go, oh, I'm really enjoying this making process. Let's continue making all of it. And then you realize that, yes, we don't need that many, but I didn't have a checklist. So I had a vague idea or a big long list, and so I was just picking from it, but no way of
I remember the
tracking
first
that.
time you showed me this. It's like, what do you think these light sconces is? I'm like, which one? It's like, all of them. Like, there's like 30. Yeah. Like, we're not a real estate agency. We're not selling them a castle. Like,
so you may find the asset pack ends up being very sconce heavy. Sconce,
hello,
by the way,
Daz,
is
and hello,
the
Webster.
oh, hello. Sconce for those, just your torch on the wall and
Yeah.
or light
I don't
fitting.
know if we've actually mentioned today what we're talking about, in case there's people who are in the chat not asking. These are assets for our Godot 4 action RPG courses. The first of which are already out. And before we get to procedurally generated mazes and dungeons, we wanted to get the assets ready. So that's what we're talking about.
Yeah. So yeah, those I'm going to get out this week. I'll send another announcement on the Discord once they're out. It's been a lot of fun making them. And from that, I haven't found a way yet of publishing I'm going to call it the tracker for the moment. I might come up with a better name later on. But basically, I've got a nice long list of things I tick off, and then on my database, it gives me a progress bar of how far it is through to that. I'm currently working on a way of implementing that externally, so if you want to be like, wow, then it'll be able to be tracked. I've also got a few other things to do with the asset pack, like just organizing it and putting things in a way that looks pretty so people can see how things interconnect, as well as the layout and all the rest of it. The layout's pretty straightforward. I've made things in modules within Blender, so I can just move around.
The modules thing is probably something we can get back to after you've shown the initial wall
Yeah.
thing, but that was an interesting conversation because you'd started designing a bunch of things. And then I came in with different criteria, and you were like, well, yes, but I'll have to remake everything.
Like, can we have a roof? Can we have a ceiling? Sorry. Yeah.
Can we have a ceiling? Or just, can I plug them in this way? And you're like, it's not how I designed it. Sure.
Bear with me.
Give me a week.
Yes, and obviously having an iteration like that it's a lot easier when it's just yourself. If you're solo deving, to suddenly go, oh, I'm going to move my criteria around. But as working in a pair, we discover things as we're going along. Like I did try not using a texture for color, but using a texture for things like ambient occlusion and maybe some normal mapping, so we could still just change the color of the asset within Godot, but actually manipulate its other textures accordingly.
Yep.
Now, that we're still not going down that route. We worked out that it would just be too onerous to go back and redo everything, and it didn't give the effect that we thought it might do. So one of the things, it looked great, didn't it, in Blender?
Looked fantastic.
It looked like the bookshelf had the sort of wooden ribbing down the side, but you couldn't see it in Godot. By the time it went on a rendered through a game engine, it just wasn't there in terms of its detail.
We have a bunch of volumetric fog to make the thing look really like realistic and have light scattering and swirls and
the volumetric fog was basically like a little bit of a blur filter.
Which you had to be 3 or 4 inches away from the bookshelf to notice. Oh,
yes.
Yeah,
let me have a look at this bookshelf.
It's a bit like me without my glasses. Like, oh, he has a nose.
I could see that before the glasses. I thought you were going to remove your nose with the glasses.
No, he has a nose. Not me, you. I'm looking at you. Okay, so why this joke is funny, right?
It's because
jokes are always really good when you have to explain them.
Yes.
That's how you know they're funny.
The other thing that I wanted to talk about real quick is the Python course. I think Daz is going through the Python course at the moment. He's really enjoying it, as should any lifetime backers. I hope you're enjoying it as well. But recently, one of my editors has finished with me. They were on an internship. Thank you, Adam, if for some reason you've been watching this.
Hi, Adam.
And he's gone off to go get a job. And I'm in IT something. I can't remember exactly what he said. I don't think he knows exactly what it is either. But the other thing was, unfortunately, my other editor who was helping me with videos currently has a dodgy shoulder, which means they can't use a mouse, which makes editing impossible for them. So that's kind of slowed down that as I picked up and moved across. But I'm aiming to release that very, very soon in its current state, which is 4 sections and 8 hours. And there's a couple of sections I want to add to the end, kind of like a bit of polish at the very end of it. So there'll be lots to get your teeth into right at the very beginning. And then there's going to be a couple of extra sections. And the final one is going to be actually creating an add-on. So we go through all the basics about how to manipulate Blender using Python. And I have been very specific with the course. I've made sure that as you're going through it, it's not just learning Python and applying it to Blender. It's actually how to use Blender Python.
Right.
So you wouldn't be able to take, well, you would be able to take it and then do Python, but you wouldn't know about things like inputs, etc. Because we're not doing that.
Course.
Yeah, it's specifically Blender Python.
And I say we, it's Mikey. Like I didn't.
Hi.
I don't even know where the Pythons live in Blender. I think they're over by the Snake House.
Awesome. Thanks, Daz. So, shall we jump into Blender and show a few things?
Jump into Blender? Who are you? What have you done with Mikey?
Let's hop on over.
Thank you.
Into Blender. And I hope my cursor works. I may be fiddling around for a little bit, but I know at least if I do this, we can see Blender. Can't see the screen in front of me, so I'm going to have to look over to the other side.
I'm going to be AFK for a second, but
that's fine.
Don't tell them; they won't know.
Capture cursor. Hey, you can see cursor. I'm going to try and make that a bit bigger. I apologize for the technical stuff right here. There we go. You can see my cursor bigger. I'm also going to make the Blender interface just a little bit bigger as well. I'm glad it's now actually working. Oh, that is relatively large. Let's make it a bit bigger. It's on a monitor further away from me, so why not? So I'm going to go through some of the process that I had during basically playing around with geometry nodes in this case, and a bit of an array modifier and a deform modifier as well later on. I don't know if we're going to get to everything I want to do. I'm going to try and keep the stream relatively straightforward. But one of the first things I want to actually do is what we're going to use later on to make the bricks look pretty is go over what Boolean operations we're going to end up doing. So if you want to follow along, you can do. If not, you can just watch. That's the other option, really, isn't it? I don't like my geometry nodes workspace horizontal. I do like it vertical, however. So I'm going to change those things around. It's personal preference more than anything else. And now that I've got an object in my scene, good old default cube, I'm not going to delete it, but I am going to remove it from this world by adding in the geometry nodes and then not using the geometry that already exists. Cool. Now I'm going to faff around for a little.
Did you just give a cube an existential crisis?
Maybe.
Am I here? Am I not here?
Oh, can I have a mini-me? No, I can't have a mini-me. That's not working. Okay. Just me playing around with OBS there. So what I want to do here is I want to create an arch, basically. I'm going to make a Gothic arch style, but I'm going to use geometry nodes to start the process. I'm going to need 2 cylinders to begin with. So I'm going to go, and I'm going to fumble this a few times because recently this menu's changed and I generally search for stuff anyway, but under mesh, we're going to look for primitives and go to a cylinder. We're going to have 2 of those cylinders, and we can start talking a little bit at this point about thinking with a procedural mindset. Now, I've said I'm going to have 2 cylinders, and these cylinders are actually going to be exactly the same. So I'm not going to do this right now, but I could do a little bit. I'm going to do a little bit of it right now. So we've got these settings, these parameters, part of the procedural making system, where I can have an input going into them. And if both of these are going to be identical, for instance, I can bring this out and I want an integer, so just a whole number, and then we've got an integer. And now I can plug this into both of them. Now we can't see anything just yet, so let's join these 2 together. with join geometry. I like how they've started doing some smart stuff there, where you click out and you get that plus, it actually shows you what's going on. Now, these are going to be two on top of one another, so you won't really see much difference. But now, if I wanted to come back, I can change both of these at the same time in terms of how detailed it is, how many vertices make up this cylinder. And that's something that you really need to think about right at the very beginning whenever you're doing anything procedural. The moment you've got a slider that's got a value going into it, think to yourself, is that going to apply to more than one thing? If the likelihood is yes, then you're probably going to have to take it out. Or with the bricks later, if you've got something in a staggered formation where you have to move it across by half the width of it, then perhaps you need to capture the width of the brick in order to do that maths later on. Sometimes retrofitting ideas like that back in, really easy. Sometimes it's a real pain in the butt because you've got such a complex node tree that adding something might take a few seconds to update, and then it's really hard to iterate through because you're not at the beginning of the process. Or Blender will crash, and it does do that lots when you're playing around with, especially Booleans, which we'll get to in a few seconds. And there was a third thing. I can't remember it, so let's move on. Now, we've got two cylinders on top of one another. That's no good because whatever Boolean operation we do, whether it's a union, a difference, or an intersect, won't mean much when things are on top of one another. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to move one, and I'm going to look down upon it. I'm going to move one of these to the side. Now, in order to do that, we need to transform the geometry. Now, there is geometry operations transform. Yeah. Now, again, I usually use search, and I'll just type in transform. I find that a lot easier. And I often will borrow a node as well. By borrow a node, I mean, let's say I want to join geometry again later on. I would select it, press Shift and D, and there you go. I've got another node, and I can just drag and drop on top of any of these connections, any of these noodles between nodes. Let's get that out of the way. So this transform geometry, we've applied it to one of these cylinders, and it'll allow us to move, i.e. translate, rotate, or scale. And if I just move this across, you can see the other circle is just there. And now I'm going to get infringement of a bond. Dun, dun, dun. Sorry.
I've been trying so hard not to make smart ass comments all the way through, and you beat me to it. I'm sitting here being professional. I'm like, I'm not going to make fun of this. I'm not going to say that.
One tip when you're working in geometry nodes that's incredibly useful is coming to your overlays and turning wireframe on. Now that can be annoying because suddenly you can see all the extra geometry. However, what is less annoying is when we come to like the fill type here, and instead of having n-gons, perhaps we just don't want anything. So it's like a pipe. Now you can look at it from the top and still see stuff. Otherwise, it goes invisible because if you turn off the wireframes, you're looking at it face on. It's just not there. And there are other things like if you're setting out a curve, something that doesn't have any 3D to it, like this looking straight on, you just can't see it. So turning the wireframe on, and even if it's not at 100%, you can always turn the opacity, which is here, down a little. I wonder what that slider actually does then. Anyway, if you know, post it in the comments below. So you can see here, we can actually make a really nice arch where two circles overlay with one another. And so if I use this translation and the size here, so this is another example, we've got a radius of 1 meter here. And if we align this to 1 meter, so if the radius equals the X position that we're moving it, we get a really nice arch shape coming up and down. And now we can start playing with a Boolean. Now we're going to have to use this mesh data and this mesh data and then plug it into a mesh Boolean. So let's go to the add menu, that's Shift and A. And, ooh, where's this? Geometry, operations. Ooh, no, it's not in there. Under mesh, operations, Boolean mesh, mesh Boolean. There we go. So these are actually organized in a very sensible way, but I still don't know where all of them are. I'm going to get rid of join geometry, press the X key to do that, and plug this back into the group output. So I'm going to take one of these, and it's set to difference at the moment. So we're taking this input, which is the one on the left, and then we're going to compare it basically to the one on the right and cut away everything that exists. Om nom nom. Now, there are two other Boolean operations. We've got ourselves an intersect, which is the one we're going to be using in a moment, and that just keeps where both meshes actually overlap. And then finally, we've got union, which seals the two together like that. So it's a pair of binoculars again. And so you can see here how we're able to manipulate our mesh and actually start making some interesting shapes. I'm going to use intersect, and then we're going to use a bit of maths in a moment to say which part of this we want to keep and which we want to delete, which will be a bit of interesting fun. But before I do that, under the fill type for our cylinders, if I switch this to an n-gon, you can see that it's actually kept that nice eye shape. But if both of them are set to n-gon, we start getting some weird stuff happening. I don't know what's going on under the hood there, or whether I need to move some extra geometry around. You can see here we can move that backwards and forwards, but we still get kind of this horrible overlapping geometry artifacts going on. Now, I have tried ticking both of these boxes. Doesn't quite work, but what I have found works. No, not really. I just discovered it right now while switching them. What I have found that works live on the stream is just setting one of them to a fill type of none. Seems to be quite nice. So I only want this top part of the arch here, not the bottom part. So there's a lovely bit of geometry, a lovely node called delete geometry. So if we go ahead and add that in, I'm going to assume it's under delete operations, delete geometry. Yes, it is. I am doing this live. I can't believe I've not screwed that up too badly yet. Right. So it's deleted everything.
Michael.
There is time. It's deleted everything at the moment. And you've got a couple of options here. You've got the points, so the individual vertices that exist. Edges, faces are self-explanatory. Splines to do with curves. And then we've got a particular instance. So if you're instancing geometry, if you've got lots of, let's say, cubes that you're instancing on all the points of something else, then you can use that. And what we're going to do is a bit of maths on faces. I know, it's scary. So these pink, let's go in here. These pink sockets, that's the word. These pink sockets with a dot in them are just a Boolean. They're a flag, true and false. That's all that can happen with them. So we're going to go backwards here and make the decision based upon a compare. We're going to compare something to something else. And a couple of ways you could think about this. In fact, let's link this back again. I'm going to press Shift and Control. If you had Node Wrangler turned on, which is under your preferences, add-ons, and then Node Wrangler. Oh, it's not actually on. Nice.
Do you picture Node Wrangler as like a digital robot version of the Marlboro Man? Because I always do.
Is that like a cowboy? Are they cigarettes?
The cowboy from the cigarette ads.
Okay. I caught up slowly. Oh, it looks like by default you can now press Shift and Control. Yeah, nice. Anyway, so we've got the viewer here, so we can preview individual nodes as we go as well, which is super useful. So if you want to see what this looks like, the cylinder, I can hold down Shift and Control. That's the first cylinder. That's the second cylinder. This is that second cylinder moved. This is them put together, etc. I'm going to go right to the end here and make sure, oh, everything's gone. So we need to pick a selection. So we're going to compare. That's the node we're going to need. I'm just going to leave it as equal to the moment, and we'll have a look at a couple of the options that we've got here. So we want to, looking back at this, let's look down at it for the moment. We want to pick the part of the arch that's, let's say, above where y equals 0. That'll be one way of thinking about it. Or we could exclude all of the mesh that's facing a particular direction. It's entirely up to you how you want to approach it. So we're going to be talking about a vector. We're in 3D space. Then we've got element-wise, length, average, dot product, and direction. I would typically, for this type of operation, either pick element-wise or dot product. With element-wise, we're just going to be able to say, well, all of the vertices that make up this or all the faces, sorry, because we're talking about faces, all the faces that are in a certain position, you can delete. because that's what this node does, delete geometry. Or we can say all of the nodes facing a certain direction. That one's called direction. I've not played with that too much. But we need something to compare to. If you're comparing two things. So we're going to drag this socket out and get a new node, and we're going to look for a position node. Now the position, as you can see here, it's a purple square on its side. What do you call a square on its side?
A diamond or lozenge.
I like lozenge. This lozenge. Lozenge.
That's it.
I need a beer before I can say that properly.
on.
We're going to call it an on-the-side square diamond. This diamond here that's purple, it's not just one value, it's multiple values. It's the attributes of this particular bit of geometry. In this case, it's going to be the position of individual elements of there. So we're going to then compare that to something else. And then we've got a distance here. So if we do the Z, just bring it up and down, nothing's happening. Let's try Y. Nice.
For the US people, when he says Z, he of course means aluminum.
Yes, of course. Equal. Oh, I don't want to equal. That's not going to result in anything, is it? We want to pick something probably less than. And if we're picking it being less than or equal to a 0 point, because I believe I built this around, yeah, Y equals 0. My test case, it was Z equals 0. So I'm probably going to screw up here just because I've changed orientation. So we want to go less than or equal to a certain amount. And then we can change these values around and see what we get. So here we can come in and say, well, less than Y equals 0. Still got elements appearing here. That's interesting. So let's try. Why is that not working? Embarrassing moment. There you go. I'm going to go to my other version then, which is the dot product, which is facing in a certain direction. And I'm going to rotate this around so my head's not screwed. Right. So under the geometry here, I'm going to rotate it. I'm going to rotate it around the x-axis. Oh, that's really cool. I need both of them to rotate around to do that. I'm not going to do that. Let's just play over here. So dot product, we're going to do the direction things are facing. And you can literally play around with these. And we are still deleting faces. Yeah, you know what was going on. That's what was confusing me. Okay, remember when you got a viewer and you're looking at the node before and not the geometry node? Yes.
I mean, I'm 30 seconds behind, so.
Yeah, I'm sorry I didn't share my screen with you. You get old version of me. Let's go back to this element Y's again, and then we can compare. So if we can now move these things around and hopefully see any impact or change they have on the position of things. And that's still not changing. Deleting geometry, all selection, anything less than. So we've got X, Y, and Z here. Nope. How bizarre. That worked on my other version. Let's go to dot product.
Of doing this live, right?
Yeah, totally. So
I love that when I'm recording a course, by the way, and I've done my prototype and it works fine and it worked first time. And then I start recording a video and I have to pause the recording and it takes me 6 hours to find out why it's not working.
Oh, you know, there could actually be a real reason for this happening. I did deviate from my original by having this fill type here being none on both of them. What's probably happening is they're not being welded together first with a merge by distance. It's actually two. They are being put together, but they've got separate geometry. That's probably what the difference is. But anyway, this is my fault from deviating from script and just experimenting. But it's okay. I'm not too... This is what gave it away. The fact that that whole one just suddenly appeared like that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change this to just none so we can see what's happening so that other face isn't in the way. You could blend these two together with a join geometry and then a merge by distance. That would solve that product, that issue as well. So we can see here on the x-axis, if we move this along, we're actually changing which parts are being deleted and which ones are being kept. Now, I don't want that arch. I want the other arch. So I'm just going to press 0 there for a moment. And then move Y, the Y-axis. There we go. And I can probably set that to 0, because we only need to affect the y-axis itself. Now, it's not coming all the way down here, and that's where this value here, we can just set it to 0 itself, and there we go. It's come all the way around.
Sorry, I'm
got a
hoping you can't
nice-
hear that one of my neighbors just started what sounds like chainsaw practice.
Oh, better than ringing the bells, but
Don't get me started on the bell ringers in my town, or peelers as they like to be called.
yeah.
These
And what
people
you can
can't
do,
keep rhythm.
yeah, what you can do is also go negative here to get the inverse. So if you did want the other side there, you could take the inverse of it. So I just want that set at 1. Because this is 0, it's not going to loop all the way around. If you go below 0, it will do. So I can leave it at 0. And there we go. We've got a nice arch there. Now, I don't want to take this any further. That's where I wanted to get to with this particular setup, just discussing the mesh boolean, which is something we can use later on when we put a wibbly wobbly version of something together with a solid version, and we can use the mesh boolean in order to make it look a bit more rustic. And what are we on time-wise at the moment? Oh, 20 minutes.
Yeah, we're 20 minutes.
Okay, so what we can do now is I'm going to start a fresh geometry node. I'm going to call this one Arch, actually, so I can refer back to it later on. I'm just going to save, just in case things go horribly wrong. I'm just going to call this live stream. There we go. Cool. Now, give me a moment while I open up my node so I can get the basics down really quickly. Oh, I've actually got the right one open. Okay, cool. Because we're going to construct the wall in a moment using just geometry nodes. So I've deleted that modifier, that geometry nodes modifier from the cube, and we're going to give the cube another existential crisis by adding another geometry nodes in. This time doing it a different way, adding it in the modifier stack and then clicking new. Exactly the same as clicking new at the top there. And we're going to make it disappear again. I'm going to do all of this in geometry nodes itself. So the first thing I want to do here is make sure that I can actually see a bit more of my screen. I'm going to stretch this out. This is going to start getting dense at a certain point. But I think as we move along, we can keep things nice and clear. The first thing I want to use is a mesh line. So I'm going to go to geometry. No, it's under mesh primitives, mesh line. There we go. Now, a mesh line is a bit of a weird one. It is literally a series of edges joined together, and the count represents how many vertices make up that particular edge, which is useful because we can see here it's always going to start from wherever 0 is, unless we change that offset or the start location, and the offset is where it ends. So in this case, our line, which we can't see at the moment because it's not joined in, there you go. We can see here it goes up by 1 meter 10 times. So if we lower this down to 1, you won't be able to see it because it's a single point. If we set it to 2, we've now got a line that has a vertex at one end, or vertex at one end and a vertex at the other end. And so you can see by this, we're going to be able to draw a line with multiple vertices on it. Why is that important? Because we can use those vertices to say, this is where I would like a brick to appear. And we're going to use instance on point to do that. So we're going to go into the add menu, and we're going to find instances, and we're going to instance on points. Then if we go ahead, we've got instance on points. If we add this in, it's going to automatically say, well, this mesh line is going to be used as the points. But what we've not done is actually pick what we're going to instance. Now, obviously, a cube would be a great starting block. So I'm going to search for cube, and we're going to see cube mesh, and we can plug that in. And you can see now that we're having a cube of size 1 by 1 by 1. With this one's always a bit difficult to get your head wrapped around. Vertices 2. Well, if we add another one to the X direction, have I got wireframe turned on still? Yes, I have. I just need to rotate round. There we go. So if I have a look here, now I've added another one to the X direction, you can see that it split it down along the X-axis, and if I did Y and Z as well, it's basically subdivided the entire cube. This can be useful if you need that extra geometry. However, when you start adding multiple of things into a scene, it's often best to keep this low as possible to begin with. Otherwise, you run the risk of really bogging down your scene really, really quickly without realizing. So we've got a mesh line. That's how we're going to say how many of these blocks we're going to have. You can already see this is going to make a nice brick wall. And if we stretch it out in one particular direction, let's do that in the X direction. Then we've got a series of brick-like objects on top of one another.
Hooray!
Ta-da! So there's a couple of other things that we can do here, and that is start building up a wall. And we need to think about how we're going to do that. And one of the things that we could do here is we could just have one, and then we could do another and offset it, and then we could use an array modifier. That would be absolutely fine. And then we're just instancing things individually, which could be really effective. However, if we start making changes to a block, so if we start making, well, let's do it quickly. Let's have a count of 2. No, let's have a count of 1. There's one block. And if we just kept to this and went, well, I want an array modifier of that, and I want it offset. A relative offset means each individual one, and we can start adding to that. It's not moving. So you start playing with these and go, it's still not moving. This is one of the things that I've been caught out with so many times when it comes to geometry nodes, and I hope it is this particular issue right now. So this geometry is kind of, well, a lot of geometry nodes geometry is just made up. It's not real in the Blender terms. So what we can do is realize our geometry by adding in, I'm going to search for this. It might be under geometry. Let's geometry operations.
Roderick asks if there's an easier way to create 5 cubes in Blender.
No, definitely not.
I told him yes, but you have to delete them.
Yes. Beep. Delete. Anyway, I'm going to get back on point here. Otherwise, we're not going to finish what we want to do. Yeah.
15 minutes.
I'm going to build a node network here. So I actually want to instance multiple cubes next to one another. So I'm going to use a mesh line plugged into some transform geometry nodes, first of all. So I've got Node Wrangler turned on now, so I can actually hold down Control, and I can right-click and delete stuff. Now I want to add in a couple of transform nodes. So I've got a mesh line and another mesh line, and then I'm going to transform them. We're going to offset one of them. Transform geometry. I'm going to plop that. So we've got one mesh line, but I'm just using it twice. So it can come down here into this other transform geometry. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to have some instance on points. I've already got those ready here. I hope my screen's readable, by the way. I know if I zoom out, Jan, yell at me to zoom back in. So
I mean, it seems readable to me. But...
Okay, cool. These transform geometries I'm going to use as a point. So I'm going to use that as points here. Oop, click and drag. Missed it. And I'm going to do the same over here. Excellent. I'm then going to join these two together. Fortunately, join geometry is one of the top ones there. And let's have this so I can see what's going on when it's ready.
Be safe, Daz, and taxi well, and we'll see you next time. Thanks
for
joining us.
Bye, Daz. Excellent. So the next thing I'm going to do here is actually have a cube coming in. This is going to be a bit of a backwards put together. I do apologize. But we're going to have another instance on point. So I'm just searching for it this time. Instance on point. Going to pop that in. And there we're going to have our cube coming in at this point as our instance. Now, what we don't have at the moment is this instance being used. So what are we going to instance on there? Now, there are a couple of ways we can instance it gets a bit instanceception when you end up with instances on top of one another.
I
I'm going to
find that
have,
in code too, but
yeah,
it is a good way of working.
I'm going to have another mesh line, and I'm going to make it a curve, and you'll see why I'm going to make it a curve later on, because we can do some stuff with a curve that we don't, that we can't do with just the mesh line itself. So I'm going to convert this to a curve first of all. It's called mesh to curve, I think. Mesh to curve. Yeah, there we go. So I'm going to convert it to a curve, and then I'm going to use that curve as the instance. And now we're going to start seeing things. So we've actually got these blocks at the moment kind of all on top of one another still, but that's fine. We can deal with that in good time. This I'm going to set to 2, so it's not going too tall for the moment. Okay, so now that we've got the geometry joined together, I can come in at this point and resample the curve. I can actually change how many vertices are put in, so it's a bit more dynamic. So I'm going to resample the curve. And you can see at this point, it's put lots of extra bricks in. And kind of, when you're doing geometry nodes, you have to kind of have a bit of faith, because things can look wrong
Right up to the last second.
Nearly. When you're playing around with things, it can certainly end up making a pig's ear out of things without realizing. So we got our instance on point. I am going to realize my geometry at this point. I've got it in my notes that I should be realizing the geometry, and I can't remember exactly what doesn't work properly if you don't realize it. So I am going to realize at this point in time. I'm also going to remove that array modifier.
For those who aren't sure, when he says realize, he's being literal, to make real. Although I guess reify would be the correct term. But yeah.
Now comes in the fun bit. Now we're going to do that mesh boolean that we had a look at earlier. So we're going to come in and add in our mesh boolean. There we go. And we're going to do the intersect just like before. Please don't crash. Please don't crash. Cute. It did that pause. Did that blooming pause.
Oh, I love that moment, don't you?
No, not in a live stream. So yes, we've got our mesh boolean here, and what that's going to do is we're going to take original blocks, and we're going to use another block, but altered slightly, to actually crinkle up the edges. And a glad meow.
Cat doesn't want you to crinkle up the edges. He wants smooth edges. I'll be right back.
Smooth edges. So we're actually, before we do this mesh boolean, so before we're going to put these things together, but after the realization, we're going to do something to this geometry. So let's subdivide it. That is one way of approaching this. It's going to give us a little bit of extra geometry that we could wiggle around and then do a mesh intersect with in a moment. So subdivide, and it does need to be a subdivision surface. So this is just like the subdivision surface on here. If we have a look at it, it's going to make things round. I have asked to have a look, and Blender's paused. There we go. You can see here it's still got... it's got kind of what we'd expect. I'm not going to up this value. Do be careful with anything to do with subdivision or instancing on points or anything along those lines that can multiply very quickly, especially early on in your chain. If we increase this by 1, by the end it could add quite a considerable number of things back on. Dum-be-dum. I don't know whether this is because I'm streaming at the moment, but Blender's being quite slow. There we go. It could be just because I was swapping that view around. And what we do need to do to this new subdivided mesh stuff is we need to set its position. And there is a set position node. So I'm going to search for that. And again, this is set the position of what? Of all of the vertices that make up that geometry. So I'm going to plug that in here. I'm going to set this to intersect, and I'm going to link these two together.
And yes, Cat is both cute and needy and loud. That was his, I want water and I don't want to go downstairs. Turn on this faucet.
And for our English speakers, that's a tap.
Yeah. And for our American audiences, a tap is what you would call a banana.
Nice. So we need to do something. We're going to offset. So we're going to move things around. So I'm going to take this back and we're going to do some stuff with it. I know I'm going to be working a bit backwards here, but I know I'm going to need a vector math in here because we're going to compare an original position of something with something else in order to make things a bit wobbly. I'm going to change this to multiply. There we go. And then I'm going to link this up to a noise texture. So yes, you can use textures, generative textures within geometry nodes. Really, really useful. We need to compare. I suppose we are comparing it. We're taking one position, one vertex position, and moving it from its original. So here we are going to have the normal position. If I can spell normal. I'm not normal. I can't spell it. And I do want, I probably want a bit of extra control. Oh, wow. What's Blender doing? I don't know why it's being super slow here. I'm guessing maybe because I'm streaming. I shouldn't have thought so, but there we go. Okay. So now we just want a bit more control in here. There's a couple of ways you can do this. I'm going to use a math node. Search for a math node, and there we go. We're going to pop it in here. Don't want to add. We could use something like multiply. Multiplication's better than division typically in any sort of function that's going on because it's typically quicker. I have played around with multiply. I've played around with power, and I've found power to have a bit more control than multiply. Probably because you need to stretch the multiply out lots in order to get things working. And there we go. So we can see something is going on here. It's not quite right at the moment. You can see we've got another diamond at the top. We're starting to kind of get shards, but not the actual layout that we particularly want. And I think I also need to play around with my cube size at the moment as well. I'm just going to hop back here. Where am I linking in my cube? Cube size, because the settings that I've got here, and again, this is going back to some of the things I was saying earlier, this is all a manual construct. It's not an ideal generalized wall brick generator. So because I've just used values and not linked them together, I'm going to have to go through and just make sure these are all correct relative to one another. And Blender is taking like 4 or 5 seconds to update. I'm not doing anything particularly complex at the moment, but what I will do... Yeah, what I will do is I'm just going to remove this Boolean operation. I'm pretty sure that's what the slowdown is happening because of that calculation there.
Just as a heads up, we are sneaking up on the hour.
Yeah, we're very, very close. I need my resample curve. I don't need that many cuts in it. Will he make it? Well, I can copy down
Place your bets, ladies and gentlemen. Can Mikey hit this before the hour?
Okay, so I do need to transform this geometry. That's why we don't have our staggered formation yet. I forgot to do that earlier. So I'm going to translate that by 2 and this one by 2. And the reason for that is to do an offset. And then we've got our next transform geometry here. I'm going to change the Z amount. So it's going to lift things up and down. I'm going to set this at 2 as well. This offset down here also needs to be 2. There we go. Now we've got a staggered formation that I was talking about earlier. And you'll probably notice there are several numbers that are recurring along here that are the same. We've got the size down here. We've got the position here and this offset here. They're actually all related to one another. And time constraint, I'm not going to go through and try and generalize this, but that's the reason why I was talking about the generalization earlier. If I thought about this right at the beginning in terms of something you could change the bricks for, then I could have set it up in such a way that it actually reacted to a change in size of bricks, etc. And the final thing I want to do here, which I didn't do earlier like a fool, I don't want any Z offset here. Doesn't that start to look a bit better? But I do want this this mesh line to go along the x-axis in this case. So it's going to go along the red axis here. And that's just how long I want my wall to be. So if I come in here and maybe set it at, I'm going to go 20 meters or so, we start to get a nice wall forming. I've obviously got a number wrong in this lot. So just bear with me a second while I just compare and go through or mistype something. No, all of that looks good so far. It looks like one of them's got two. Is it this one here? No. Okay, well, I'll probably discover that as going through later on. Now let's turn back on my mesh boolean. Now we've not got all that geometry bang on top of itself all the time. Wait for it to update.
And I will be is-catted.
Is-catted again.
Well, before it was caboodle.
Oh, okay. And everything's disappeared. Oh, this is great. There's another setting that I've glazed over whilst rushing around, and that is the amount of edge crease. Because at the moment, if we were to have a look at these are our bricks, so to speak, that we are saying we want the areas that intersect our square bricks with these bricks to be a mesh boolean intersect. If we actually have a look at how these are constructed really quickly, you'll notice that the only points that actually intersect the geometry are going to be these very points, if that, on the extremities of these. So we don't need that to happen. I'm going to increase this a little at a time. I found 0.2 to 0.25 or something along those lines. This is this increase of edge crease is bringing 0.25. 0.5 is a bit far. Is bringing the actual subdivision. It's adding a crease to the edge, meaning it's not going to round everything perfectly round like you would do with a normal subdivision. Let's get rid of the viewer node here and have a look at how things are working. Interesting. So I think it's time to play with the noise texture that we're using, because that's changing around the positions of things. In fact, we weren't looking at the position before. Here we go. This is what's happening after the subdivision. We're setting the position, and this is where we can start to play around with controlling how much the noise is affecting it by increasing this. And we can also play around with the noise texture itself. So I'm going to set this to 4D, and I'm going to come through and set the size here. These are just numbers that I've been playing with earlier. Again, I know work rather than doing slow stuff. So if I set that to around 40, this one to around 3.6, and then come back here. And make sure I tick self-intersection. There we go, that's better. I still don't know why I've got this extra bit on top there. But you can see here, I've now started to erode away my bricks along the edge using that mesh boolean with intersect. In fact, some of the bricks, I don't think I've got a right setting on this offset early on. But now you can come in and you can play with things like the edge crease. You could increase it. You could increase the number of subdivisions. That will push things further to the edge. So you might have to add a bit more of this edge crease in. You can see you can start to get some really nice blocks with worn edges. I'd probably increase that until it's more chipped along the edge rather than... Oh, that's too far. It's very sensitive. That's what I can say with this.
Impressive, though.
And the great thing about doing it like this, rather than doing just a couple of them, is all of these are unique bricks. So that's a pretty nifty thing to have if you wanted a wall section where you're not coming in and moving a couple of vertices. Now, you do have to be careful. This is one of the things that can very easily trip you up. This whole wall section now has 23,000 triangles. Well, let's call it 24. It's not far from it. It's got 24,000 triangles. So one of the things you're going to have to watch out for when you play with procedural stuff is the triangle count going through the roof. However, you can come over here to, let's say, the decimate modifier. That's the one I was looking for. Give it a few seconds. And then I've often found that the planar option can give some good results with this type of mesh that we're trying to work out. So the planar option starts removing geometry based upon angles. So we can see here we're down to 15 set at 5. I'm going to increase this. So it's going to keep things within a 30-degree angle. This might be too much. You can see we're down to 5,000, but it has made the mesh quirky in places, which is probably not ideal. However, even if you do end up with some horrible geometry like this, you can certainly play around with these settings, and maybe we take it down to 10 and have a look at what happens then to our block work. We can always find a point where we either don't have any of these problems, or where the problems we can deal with later on and actually just clean things up manually. One of the things I have done lots of is got almost there with geometry nodes, then solidified it, which we can do by selecting our object, pressing F3 to do a search, and we're going to convert to a mesh. And what that will do is it will apply all of our modifiers, including the geometry nodes. Occasionally you have to have a realize instances into our geometry nodes there, but now this is actual mesh data. We can come in and start finding, right, what is this thing that's causing us a problem in here, and actually start cleaning up the geometry. And there we go, we've got an interesting brick wall with a very solid lump just here. Oh, in fact, that's all one face. So it's not the best geometry at the very end of it, but again, you can come in and clean up. And multiple times when geometry isn't quote unquote the best, this certainly isn't going to follow any quad topology, and it will be a real pain in the backside to make it follow quad topology. But that's not going to be a big problem for a static non-deforming mesh, as long as it renders fine in both Blender as an initial step and in the game engine when you get it over into the game engine. That is what's actually important. So this shading artifact that we can see here, you could argue, if you can't see that when you import it into a game engine, does it matter? It could matter. It could add up to a bigger problem later on, perhaps with collision or perhaps with some other interaction. I would want to clean it up just out of I don't like that, and I presume it's just linked to this bit of geometry here. Yeah, it looks like there's a funky face going on in there somewhere. So that's certainly something you could clean up, probably by joining geometry together or going in and deleting it in an inside face somewhere. There's lots of options for it, but I wouldn't care too much if there was just one, and when we render it, I don't know, this stream might get a bit funny when I've gone into rendered mode. Oh, there's no light in the scene anywhere. There's a point light. Let's go to this view. Yeah, I think if you can't see the rendering artifact, especially at an early stage like this, you want to get this into your game and see if it looks good, then just leave it there for the moment. But take note that it has one. If you've got lots and lots of artifacts, let's see what happens. Can I see it in face select? Let's have a quick look. So change our mode to face select. Ooh, that's an interesting one. Maybe it's that one there. Nope. I'm not sure where this crosses over. So that's a mystery to solve another day. I'm sure you don't want me to play hunt the vertex with you guys right now. And I'm going to pull Jan and I back onto the stream. Wow. I do like doing these things live.
I still haven't got if we've come back yet.
Yeah, we're back.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can't
use my keyboard very well because I have his cat on it. In fact, I'm going to try and move it. Buddy, can I just pick you up? Yeah, no,
Roderick, you are 100% right. If you make a mess and no one's around to witness it, did you really make a mess? No. I've often thought about hiding like a really low poly MB in the middle of like mesh that I've done. Sort of like a little signature calling card.
Nice. If you make a mess and no one's around to witness it, you did make a mess if it made a noise.
That's a different type of mess.
Sure.
And I've not actually played with Blender's audio stuff yet. I probably
Blender
never
has
will.
audio?
Yeah.
Oh.
So you can hear the default cube scream. Ah!
Well done, Mikey. Okay, we are running a little over, so why don't we open the floor for any questions, concerns, comments, jingles, or interpretive dances? And yeah. I do want to point out, Mikey and I have been playing Barotrauma with some friends every week. And at some point, I want to talk about this game because there's something really compelling about playing this game with friends, and I've yet to figure out what it is. Like, it's a solid game. It's a lot of fun. It's real janky in places, and you will fall down ladders for no reason, and the inventory is a pain. So that doesn't seem to get in the way.
So you know this what is fun conversation that crops up oh so often when we're chatting. Earlier on today, I was in the car with my daughter who wants a Switch for Christmas, and I'm like, okay, well, what games do you want? And she hadn't even thought about that process. And I also just said to her, are you sure you want to Switch? You've got a PC that you can use that you play games on. The cost of a Switch plus a couple of games is like, I don't know, 20 full price. Anyway, it soon adds up to a lot of full price games that you could take. And she was like adamant on the Switch. I was like, oh, that's fine. And then we got onto the topic about VR, and she's like, oh, if I have VR in my room, if I have my own VR headset? I'm like, no, you'll end up either hitting your brother, full haymaker, or like bashing into stuff. Your room's just too small to do it. Oh, really? Yes, yeah, really. But anyway, we were talking about VR, and I started remembering a game that I played way back, like on the original Oculus when it was just the dev kit. And I played a game called Lunar Lander. And she compared it to an iPad game where you get a little dude and he's like an astronaut and you have to hop from pad to pad. I was like, yeah, it's kind of like that, but far more. And I just twigged the whole purpose of having 6 axis of freedom and being able to get from like one platform to another, but if you're accelerating for more than half the distance, you're going to overshoot it because physics. It was a really enjoying technical game, but I would not have described it, and I'm sure a child wouldn't have described it as fun. But it was engaging because of the technical nature of the game and how precise you had to be.
I mean, that's something we talk about a lot, is that fun isn't that useful a term when designing games, because some brilliant games aren't fun.
I think people conflate it with, I want people to enjoy my game, right?
Even then, like, this war of mine is neither fun nor enjoyable, but it's real good.
It's quite depressing.
It's compelling.
If you've got children, I think, I think it... Because I've got children, it definitely hits me harder than if I'd have played that before children.
Yeah, no doubt. Like it's a very cool game. It's very compelling. It isn't fun. I wouldn't call it enjoyable, but it's anyway. This is well-trodden ground for us.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just wanted to bring that up. There's something about that game that I feel requires a little more analysis. It's great when you guys develop some sort of competence and then the game pushes back and suddenly there's a whole bunch of challenges you've never seen before, like glowing hammerheads. But I don't know, there's something really well crafted in that game.
I mean, it definitely has a great sort of excitement to dullness curve, because there are parts of the game that are just inventory management and everything else, which a lot of those type of games have anyway. But there was one moment last night that I went outside the ship to go harvest some materials, and I could see them just the other side of an outcrop. So I get out the ship, we're positioned, and that's what we're there for, and we're doing some repairs and other stuff. I go out about halfway around this outcrop, I see what are called, I think, mud raptors in the game. They're low-level enemies, but there's 3 of them. I don't stand a chance, so I turn around, but I didn't realize at this point in the game that the different diving suits that you could wear alter your speed. So I can't outrun these things. I could if I was in a combat suit, which I eventually switched to. But I got to the door and got chomped on. I got inside and I'm
Yeah.
bleeding out and I keel over and I'm like, medic! And it was tense for a moment. And there were lots of instances like that where the game gets incredibly tense and you're literally on a knife edge as to whether or not you are going to survive. You could lose your entire mission in a blink of an eye, and we have done on previous runs. It's
Oh yeah.
one thing leads to another, and it's
I do
failure.
want to talk about that game, and if you like it, like I'd like to compare it to things like Pulsar, Artemis Bridge Simulator, like Sea of Thieves, some other like bridge crew simulation games.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's something very interesting going on that I haven't nailed down yet.
Yeah.
Anyway, if we don't have any questions and things, I need to get some food.
It's.
We're
I've got a question. What are you going to have for dinner?
I'm thinking baked potatoes with beans, butter, and cheese.
So, funny story about baked beans. Years and years and years ago, I had someone I was dating at the time. Because I'd done something that annoyed her, she threatened that I'd only have beans on toast for dinner. That backfired because beans on toast is one of my favorite meals. I'm like, it's not going to work.
And there's only one way that Michael is going to respond to that kind of comment anyway.
Let's go.
If you keep doing this, consequence will happen. Banzai!
Really? Let's test
It's a
that.
phrase I shouldn't be using.
Don't push the button. Yes.
That was, and I will finish on this story. I play as the electrician in our game of Barotrauma, and my job is to keep all the systems running, the reactor running, and upgrade things as need be. I make myself a remote control for the reactor, which is real handy when you need to shut it down at some times or just check it's not overheating and you're the other end of the ship or just outside it. But I make one and it vanishes, so I make a second one. And the guy we're playing with, Matt, finds it in a crate and says, "What's this?" So it's the reactor. It's like, "Really? This is really cool." It's like, "So this controls the reactor?" "Yeah." Entire ship goes dark. We all go quiet. It was like, there was a big red button.
I pushed the big red button. Ah, brilliant.
All right. Michael, thank you for a little tour in Geometry Notes.
Yep. Lots of fun. Calamity, as usual.
Folks, thank you for joining us. I hope you had a lovely time and you like the jelly and the ice cream. Dinner. I'll see you in a moment. Cats, thank you so much for all the clawful meowing.
Clawful. Love it. Well, thank you, everybody, for joining us this evening. I hope you've had fun. Oh, yep.
And Jelly posted in another Discord a sea shanty, and I've been fighting the urge to sing sea shanties all the way through this, so I think I deserve a treat.
Oh, I thought you were about to, I thought you were about to start singing, so I got
what was about?
You've been muted. Ha ha ha.
All right. Thank you, everybody. We shall see you next time. Michael, thank you. People, thank you. We don't have to sign off. We got to sign off.
I'm trying to use my mouse cursor on a computer that's not connected to this mouse.
Genius.
You would have said press it for a long time. Thanks, everybody.
Bye. Press it.
I'm getting